Good morning and welcome to the SBS Step-by-Step Final Conference. Before we start the agenda, just a practical point for those of you who may wish to use the interpretation facility. Most of you will be familiar with the general way in which Zoom works, but towards the bottom of your screen, in most versions of Zoom, you will see a globe with the word interpretation underneath it. If you click on that, you will have an option of French and English, and you can select the channel you would like to hear. You also have the option to mute the original audio once you've selected your language, which will mean you won't hear the other language being spoken in the background. If you'd like to select that, if that applies to you now, my colleague Maddie will just translate that, and after that the interpreters will do the rest of the translation for the day. Thank you, Maddie.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, et donc bienvenue à la conférence finale du projet Step by Step. Juste avant donc de démarrer, quelques petites précisions techniques pour donc les personnes qui souhaiteraient utiliser la fonction interprétariat. Si vous regardez en haut bas de votre écran, vous allez voir français.
Screen a globe where it says interpretation. You can click on it and choose your favorite language, whether it is English or French. And in that way, you can hear your language live. And I'll give the floor back to Thomas now.
Okay, thank you very much, Maddie. So my name's Thomas Malloy. I'm a senior project manager with the Health and Europe Centre based in the UK, and we've been the lead partner on the SBS Step-by-Step project funded by the 2Cs Interreg programme from the European Regional Development Fund, which has been running since the middle of 2017. I'll be hosting this morning, so you'll see me in between slots, but most of the content will come from a number of external speakers and some of our partners for the day. Before I hand over to Alice Chapman-Hatchett for the welcome, just a couple of brief housekeeping points. Firstly, we have two ways you can communicate with us during the morning. The first is the standard chat function which Zoom has. So if you have any particular concerns with how things are going or just want to talk informally, please feel free to use that. I can't promise the extent to which we'll be able to engage back with you, but we'll try. During the agenda, we've got two question and answer sessions. If you'd like to put a question forward for those, please click on the Q&A bit at the bottom of your screen and ask a question in that. So in other words, we'll look to that section for the questions that we'll turn to in our question and answer sessions a little bit later in the morning. Hopefully that's clear. I hope you'll enjoy the day. If you're using social media, then the hashtag for today is hashtag 2CsSBS. The 2 is the figure 2 rather than the word 2. So hashtag 2CsSBS. You probably saw that on the screen before we started the day. So without further ado, to welcome us to our morning, I'd like to introduce Alice Chapman-Hatchett, Director of the Health and Europe Centre, which, as I say, has been the lead partner on this project. Alice, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for attending this final conference of the SBS Step-by-Step project. In this introduction, I'd like to answer the following 4 questions to give you a slight overview of the project. Who, what, why, what next? To start with the who, we are the Step-by-Step SBS project, funded by the Interreg 2Cs programme. When I say we, there are 10 partner organisations from the UK, France, Belgium and Netherlands from a range of sectors: local government, community centres, a university partner for evaluation, and social enterprise, not for profit. As Tom said, I'm Alice Chapman-Hatchett, the Director of the Health and Europe Centre, and we are the project lead for the SBS project. Our role has been to build the project consortium put the funding application together, and then manage and deliver SBS once it was approved for funding. Moving on to the what. What did we do? SBS started from the recognition of the health inequalities between men and women. Men access health services less than women and experience poorer physical health outcomes. Their suicide rates across Europe are increasing, and social isolation and poor mental health are contributing factors. Depression and other mental health problems are under-detected and under-treated, and men's physical health is similarly poor. To give some examples from the areas represented by the partnership, at the time of preparing the application, Flanders had the highest men's suicide rate in Europe. Nord-Pas-de-Calais had the second highest men's mortality ratio in France. And in Hampshire, men's healthy life expectancy was falling. We wanted to improve things. We recognise that health doesn't just happen in a doctor's surgery, it happens in people's everyday lives. In terms of what we actually did, empowering men to move from poor health and/or isolation to healthy social participation or engagement in the labour market. You'll hear more detail about this during this morning. Moving on to the why. The Health and Europe Centre has been doing this work for 20 years, bringing different people and different countries together, building solutions, trying to address some of society's health inequalities, and ultimately changing lives. SBS is an excellent example of cross-border collaboration, where the end result is something that is greater than the sum of all the individual partner parts. At this point, I'd like to thank all our project partners for 4 very productive years and for all the hard work that has gone into making SBS a success, particularly during the pandemic. Sadly, I think there is a far greater need for SBS now as a consequence of COVID than there was even at the time when we were writing the project proposal. The pandemic has changed everybody's lives, and I think SBS has an increasing role to play. In particular, I'd like to thank the 2Cs programme, the territorial facilitators, and all our contacts at the Joint Secretariat and Managing Authority for all their support of SBS, particularly during the pandemic and the changes that this has caused. I'd also like to thank Maddie and her colleagues for the organisation of today's event, and my colleague Tom, SBS Project Manager, who will be guiding us through this morning. In conclusion, what next? On an immediate level, you'll now hear far more about SBS and what we did in practical terms and its impact. Looking further ahead, I hope this learning will inspire you to use SBS and for you to help improve other people's lives as well. Finally, I hope our experience can also inspire some of you to start or continue working with the Health in Europe Centre as we begin a new life in a new way in Ireland. We're here and ready to collaborate. Thank you. Moving on with our agenda now, I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is coming to us all the way from Australia. Barry Golding is a professor at the Federation University of Australia and is a key figure in men's sheds research and has been nominated and awarded prizes as a consequence of the work that he has done. He will be giving us a bit of a background and context to what is a shed, what are men's sheds, and talking us through the concept of the men's shed movement. This will be done obviously by video. It would be nice to be live streaming him in from Australia, but the time difference doesn't allow. So here is Barry Golding talking to us about the men's sheds movement.
I'd like to say thanks first for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this online forum from Australia. I've been very fortunate to be able to ride the shed wave as a researcher and writer in the field for around 2 decades, and also as patron of the Australian Men's Sheds Association for 12 years. Some of you may know in 2015 I wrote the Men's Shed Movement, the Company of Men book, which details the men's shed model and its Australian origins. Can I just say I really like the way the key elements of sheds have been distilled into your SPS model. The 4 main things: organised by shedders, safe, self-managing, and building strong relationships to the wider community. In addition, I noticed that the SBS model has brought in new mechanisms for incorporating holistic coaching, well-being, healthcare, and employment. And I really look forward to reading the research products that come from your bold and very interesting initiative. I do acknowledge that the impact of COVID on your project and the rest of the world, including here in Australia, has been quite significant, and the effect on sheds has been pretty dire in many cases. So I know this has probably compromised some of what you intended to do. I also observed that men's sheds have now achieved movement status in 7 countries, that is Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US, Ireland, the UK and Denmark. And I've comprehensively documented the state of play in my forthcoming new book called Shoulder to Shoulder, Broadening the Men's Shed Movement, which has got an agenda for spreading men's sheds, including, as you're doing, into Europe. Can I just note also that women's sheds are also spreading in a really interesting way, making approximately 3,000 sheds open worldwide to 2021. Before the SPS project, my understanding is that Denmark was really the only non-English speaking nation in Europe where the men's shed model had been attempted. And for this reason, whether or not sheds gain traction in France, Belgium or the Netherlands will be fascinating for us all to watch and to learn from. So thanks again for including me, and all the best to the SPS team, and particularly the new sheds and shedders and all of those who've been involved in this really interesting and important initiative. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Barry Golding there. As Alice said, it's a shame he can't be with us in person, but we are where we are. And it's been really great to see over the last year or so just how well this project and sheds in general have been able to cope under the very difficult circumstances. So moving on, I'd like to hand over next to Martin Todd. Martin is Chief Executive of the Men's Health Forum, the Centre of Excellence for Men's Health Policy and Practice, a charity whose mission is to improve the health of men and boys in England, Wales and Scotland. Martin's also an elected councillor, a local campaigner on a wide range of issues, and an active volunteer primarily with homelessness charities and environmental groups. Martin, welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for the chance to come along today. This has been an incredibly exciting project, and it's a great pleasure to be here today and to learn about all the successes of it. So, a quick introduction. As said, Men's Health Forum exists to improve the health of men and boys. We're a charity, a non-profit, and we work across England, Scotland, and Wales. Perhaps of interest to those outside the UK, we're a founder member of Global Action on Men's Health, which is a new international network of men's health organisations, which is gradually spreading around Europe and the world in terms of bringing people together to learn from each other. And I know there'll be a lot of interest in today's conference and the outcome of it. What do? We do work on research and policy. So, for example, looking at the higher incidence of diabetes amongst men, we share good practice, such as how to make mental health services work for men. We work with others on campaigns, such as this was a campaign that we ran for Men's Health Week. And we work directly with men, and we have a men's health guide, the Man Manual, which we use, which is very popular and successful. So why men's health? Well, the definition of premature death in the UK is death under the age of 75. And even today, 2 men in 5, around 40%, die before they reach the age of 75, prematurely as the government would have it. But we also look at a slightly tighter definition, which is under 65, which is roughly the age of retirement in the UK. The age of retirement is increasing. And 1 man in 5 dies before they reach retirement. A truly shocking figure when you stop and think about it. 1 man in 5. Look at 5 men. Statistically, 1 in 5 of them will not make it to retirement, with all the economic, social, emotional consequences that has for people around them. And if you look at mortality, what you see is that at every single age group, all the way through, men are more likely to die than women. Until you get to 80 plus, and that's only because we've run out of men at that point. The life expectancy gap is closing in the UK. So there used to be a bigger life expectancy gap between men and women, but recently it has leveled off in terms of improvement in life expectancy. As mentioned earlier, in Hampshire at the time of the project, it was declining. In fact, nationally, because of COVID, it's declined, and I'll come back to COVID in a minute. It's been mentioned earlier that men are 3 in 4 suicides, and you see that it's in all age groups, with a peak in the late 40s, and it is the biggest cause of death, male death in the UK, up to the age of 50. After that, it's heart disease up to the age of 80, and then it becomes dementia from that point onwards. But you see that picture right across a wide range of conditions. Cancer is another one. We talk a lot about men's cancers, so there's a lot of conversation that goes on about prostate cancer and testicular cancer, but it's important to note that in all areas, all types of cancer that both men and women can get, apart from breast cancer, men are much more likely to die from cancer than women. And there are huge inequalities. Now, there's a measure that the British government uses of deprivation decile, which takes a range of metrics to sort of rank areas by deprivation. What you can see here is the gap. So that if you look on the left, it's male life expectancy. On the right, it's female life expectancy, with the column on the left being the most deprived areas, the column on the right being the least deprived areas. What you see is life expectancy is unsurprisingly lower for men, but actually what you see is the gap between men and men is much, much bigger than it is between men and women. And there's a bigger gap between the richest men and the poorest men. We talk a lot about inequalities rightly between men and women, and it's true that men are the majority of billionaires, but they're also the majority of people who are sleeping rough, the majority of people in contact with the criminal justice system. And if we look at, even within an area like Hampshire, which is a relatively prosperous part of the UK, this is just a map of Hampshire. You can see there it is. And the Hampshire gap between the richest area and the poorest area in terms of male life expectancy is 15 years. A truly shocking figure when you stop and think about it. 15 years of life less in Forton Ward, in Gosport, as opposed to Hatchwarren and Beggarwood. But what's interesting is that if you look even within Basingstoke, which is the place up on with the arrow at the top, if you compare just the two wards within Basingstoke of Rookstown and Hatchwarren and Beggarwood, you've got a 13-year gap in life expectancy. And it's important to note that even within prosperous areas, there will be communities and groups of men who have much, much worse health outcomes. So, for example, I talked about rough sleepers. There is an important gypsy and traveller community in Hampshire, where there are big health inequalities versus other people, but also where sex and gender play a very important role. So is it all men's fault? Is it just because men don't go to the doctor? The interesting thing is that men are likely to consult GPs, general practitioners, less than women until the day they retire, when there's no difference at all. Which suggests that we need to be careful about assigning it to sort of core concepts of masculinity. It does relate a lot to, firstly, how men relate to work, but also how the health system relates to work, and something that I think doesn't get enough attention. And it's striking also that women in full-time work use general practice much less than women who are not. A quick conversation about COVID, because COVID, I think, has brought the challenges of men's health into stark relief. And what you see here, and this is deaths across the UK from COVID between January and June 2021, is that, again, in all age groups, up until the run out of men problem, 85 plus, men are much more likely to die from COVID, much, much more likely to die from COVID. Something that is sort of touched on occasionally, but hasn't always had the attention it's needed. But COVID has also brought to life a lot of the other themes of men's health. It's shown huge inequalities between different men. So men from minority ethnic communities, men from areas of deprivation are much more likely to die from COVID. It's related to biology, in that there are definite biological reasons why men are more likely to die from COVID, but it's also related to masculinity and attitudes. So there have been different attitudes to masking, different attitudes to vaccination, and different engagement with services. Vaccination is a particularly interesting one. So this is a pyramid that's produced by Public Health England, as was. I can't remember which bit of Public Health England it's been split into. And what you can't really see from this is that this is the latest figures from last week of differential vaccination rates in the UK. And to try and make the difference clearer, the people on the left are the men and the people on the right are the women. This is the vaccination gap in uptake in the UK. And what you see is that there are quite significant gaps amongst men, always in terms of vaccination uptake. There are two ways of calculating it. One says the biggest problem is with middle-aged men. The other one, used by the National Health Service, says the biggest problem is with younger men. And what's interesting about that is it is not attitude driven, as far as we can tell. There is a bit of bravado, and it's not going to happen to me, particularly amongst the younger men. But generally, whenever we've looked at questions of vaccine hesitancy, which is how it's been determined, it's not about I'm frightened of vaccines or other such things. That's skewed more female. And a lot of it's about the fact that the health system doesn't know men as well as it does women, and men don't know the health system as well as women. And that's definitely a factor as well. What's the way forward? And this is an issue that can be tackled, and it needs to be tackled on more than an intervention basis. It needs to be tackled on a much wider basis. Here in the UK, we've seen studies in areas such as Leeds, a major city in the north of England, which did a groundbreaking report on the state of men's health in Leeds, and has led to lots of interventions and programs and policy changes to try and address the issues raised of men's health. But also a good example of a region taking it on is, or a province in Canada, is Quebec, put in place a men's health plan, which they used, often alongside a women's health plan in both these cases. And similarly, if you look internationally, we see the only country in the European Union which has put, in fact, in Europe, full stop, that's put in place a men's health strategy is the Healthy Island strategy. But there's also a very good WHO Europe strategy for health and well-being of men, which we would hope, again, would lead to the kind of deeper structural change as well as the sort of interventions that we're talking about today. So I hope that provides a useful sort of conversation starter to why men's health is so important, and why the conference today is so important, and why we need to be taking action and looking at interventions that are tailored and work to tackle the particular issues that men have in accessing, using and benefiting from the health system and the wider determinants that lead to them having worse health.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that really detailed and informative overview of exactly how this fits into the health picture for men. That was great. Moving on, we're now going to talk about the kind of the what from Alice's introduction earlier. What is it that we have, as a project, have been working on and have delivered? And there were several elements to this. Each of them will be introduced by somebody from the SBS partner who's led on things. And we'll start off with our third generation men's health sheds model, the SBS model. And Sylvain Maisonneuve from the Association of Social Centres in Waterloo, which is in the Greater Lille area, will talk us through that aspect of the SBS project. Sylvain.
Oui. Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour et puis merci pour cette première partie de présentation qui était plutôt claire, alors qui ne nous laisse pas forcément une note positive par rapport à ce qu'on a entendu et les statistiques liées un peu notamment à la santé des hommes. Je vais essayer d'apporter une petite touche un peu positive par rapport à l'expérimentation qu'on mène ici à Waterloo dans le cadre du projet SBS qui apporte une partie des réponses, en tout cas qui essaie d'apporter des réponses au quotidien pour les hommes qui participent au projet SBS. Vous le savez, les sheds, c'est avant tout des lieux où des gens se rencontrent. C'est du contact humain, c'est du lien social au quotidien. Ça part de pas grand-chose, c'est-à-dire c'est des choses très simples à réaliser, mais qu'on a fortement oublié peut-être ces dernières années, ou avec les mauvaises habitudes, avec la pression du système. Et du coup, on recrée un peu des lieux comme ça, propices à la proximité, à discuter, à échanger et à recréer du lien. C'est un petit peu la base d'un shed. Et quelle que soit en fait l'origine et l'âge et les différences qu'il y a entre les personnes, tout le monde est au même niveau. Donc, c'est la base des modèles des sheds. Donc, c'est notamment ouvert aux hommes en l'occurrence. Donc, on pourra peut-être s'en parler aussi après de cette question de mixité ou de non-mixité, mais qui a du sens. Ça réunit quand même un certain nombre de personnes vulnérables à différents niveaux. On le sait aujourd'hui, il n'y a pas que la question de l'emploi qui est importante aujourd'hui auprès des individus. Vous l'avez présenté là juste avant, notamment à travers les chiffres de la santé, que ce soit la santé mentale ou la santé physique. Et l'idée, c'est qu'à travers une pratique de lien social, de se voir au quotidien, on reprend des bonnes habitudes. On rediscute avec les personnes, on retrouve du sens à se réunir, à se parler, à s'écouter, à trouver une oreille. C'est encore une fois assez simpliste, mais des personnes dans la solitude, du jour au lendemain, en intégrant un shed, on retrouve une oreille à qui parler, quoi. Et ça peut être à la fois avec un professionnel, mais aussi avec un bénévole, avec un père aussi, c'est-à-dire avec quelqu'un qui peut vivre les mêmes choses au quotidien. Et du coup, se forme beaucoup d'entraide et de solidarité dans les sheds. Et du coup, systématiquement, au fur et à mesure que les groupes se montent, que les collectifs un peu travaillent entre eux, on observe qu'il y a énormément de solidarité et pas forcément que dans l'activité du shed. C'est-à-dire tout autour de ce shed, les personnes gardent du lien, gardent du contact et s'entraident au quotidien. Et ça permet du coup aussi de plus facilement introduire les thématiques dont on a parlé tout à l'heure autour de la santé, c'est-à-dire qu'une fois qu'on se sent un peu plus en confiance, qu'on est dans un collectif, qu'on est rassuré, c'est là qu'on peut intégrer ces questions notamment de santé que vous avez évoquées tout à l'heure, la question de la formation, la question de l'emploi. Et du coup, c'est dans ce climat de confiance qu'on arrive à mener un certain nombre d'événements, d'ateliers, de rencontres pour pouvoir discuter, échanger, mais aussi apprendre, se former et découvrir des nouveaux aspects qu'on ne pourrait pas connaître habituellement. On parle beaucoup d'écoute active dans les chats, c'est-à-dire on s'écoute beaucoup les uns les autres avant de dire qu'on va pouvoir mener tel ou tel atelier. Et puis du coup, alors l'avantage, c'est que chez nous, ça se passe dans des centres sociaux. Et en fait, on connaît déjà ça, hein, c'est la question du vivre ensemble qui est travaillé dans les centres sociaux en France. On a déjà un peu cette pratique de créer du lien social sur des choses un peu simples comme celle-ci. Et du coup, nous, ça nous a permis aussi d'expérimenter un peu d'une autre manière. Et du coup, il y a à la fois des moments informels et des moments un peu plus formels. Et sur les moments formels, c'est comment on apprend à mieux se nourrir, comment on apprend à s'occuper un peu mieux de sa santé, comment on apprend à se rendre compte aussi qu'on peut être en mauvaise santé. Vous le disiez tout à l'heure, hein, les chiffres des hommes sont assez catastrophiques. C'est compliqué à analyser, mais rien que de se rendre compte qu'on est en mauvaise santé à un moment donné, mais c'est grâce au fait qu'on ait pu avoir des ateliers, des rencontres, des échanges, c'est un premier pas pour se dire « Ah, bah ça y est, je prends conscience et je vais enfin m'occuper de moi ». Et puis c'est dans le collectif, hein, c'est-à-dire que si le shader a décidé de s'occuper de lui, ça a des effets sur les autres shaders aussi par la suite parce que ah bah, moi aussi et moi aussi. Et du coup, on peut aussi emmener en collectif, faire des bilans de santé et les gens sont beaucoup plus en confiance pour le réaliser que s'ils allaient le faire tout seuls. La vie n'est pas facile, hein. Les freins quotidiens, on le voit tous les jours et nous, on le constate dans les centres sociaux en France. On parle souvent de l'emploi qui est le premier frein de sociabilité ou d'insertion. Mais on sait très bien que tant qu'on n'a pas levé les freins autour de la santé, autour du psychologique, autour de la mobilité, on peut pas, ou on a du mal en tout cas à avancer dans cette société ou dans le système. Alors l'idée aussi, c'est qu'il y a un certain nombre d'outils plutôt naturels, c'est-à-dire que les shaders ont déjà des propres compétences qui leur sont propres. Très souvent, on va retrouver des ateliers bois, hein, de bricolage autour du bois. Ça revient régulièrement dans les sheds. Alors pourquoi? Parce que naturellement, certains détiennent la compétence. Et là, il y a tout cet effet de transmission de savoir et de compétences qui se fait naturellement. Allez, on va fabriquer un lieu, on va fabriquer du mobilier pour animer un bout de rue ou un jardin, on va mettre en place des espaces de jeu pour des enfants. Et du coup, ça se fait de manière plutôt systématique et bénévole sur leur temps libre. Et chacun va se transmettre un petit peu un savoir-faire, une compétence. Et c'est des compétences qui ne sont pas forcément valorisées dans le système scolaire ou de l'emploi traditionnel. Ce qu'on appelle aussi beaucoup les compétences douces, hein, les soft skills dans les projets européens ou dans les diagnostics que l'on fait. Et ben, quelque part, le fait de pouvoir mettre ça en avant, ça permet aussi de valoriser un curriculum vitae, une expérience, un savoir-faire, pour pouvoir aussi retrouver de l'emploi derrière. Mais à travers tout ça, ce qui se fait, on le disait tout à l'heure, c'est aussi ce schéma d'entraide, hein, de bienveillance et de transmission de savoir au quotidien. Donc, il y a ceux qui découvrent aussi, qui arrivent. J'arrive dans un shed, moi je ne savais pas trop bricoler, etc. Et du coup, du jour au lendemain, on m'apprend à bricoler, à travailler le bois. C'est assez valorisant. Quand on était tout seul, exclu du système, et du coup, du jour au lendemain, de pouvoir apprendre une technique nouvelle. Alors, le bois, ce n'est qu'un exemple, hein, il y a tout un tas de choses. On fait beaucoup de jardinage aussi, par exemple, nous, dans le shed ici à Waterloo en France. Et du coup, plus on avance là-dessus, plus il y a un sentiment d'appartenance au groupe et plus ça crée des effets positifs en fait au fur et à mesure qu'on avance. Ça paraît aussi simple en le disant, mais c'est ce qui fait que tout ça, ce lien social, ces activités, nous permettent effectivement un meilleur accès au système de santé. Vous le disiez tout à l'heure dans le diagnostic, hein, dans les rapports, c'est que le système de santé en France est là, existe, mais malheureusement, pour un certain nombre de freins ou de représentations, les personnes ont du mal à y aller. Et c'est vraiment à travers toutes ces activités, tous ces événements, que les shaders, petit à petit, retrouvent confiance au schéma de santé et peuvent enfin penser à eux et prendre soin de leur santé. Et très souvent, c'est quand le projet d'insertion un peu se dessine un petit peu mieux, quand on se sent un peu mieux, qu'on est capable aussi de le faire. Ce qui est intéressant aussi, c'est tout le relais qui se fait dans un quartier. sur un territoire parce que les shaders deviennent des vrais relais auprès des autres habitants. C'est-à-dire qu'ils vont transmettre des messages positifs aussi. Ils vont se porter garant pour avoir des gestes de solidarité, pour aller faire des courses, pour aller faire des petits services à la personne, aider au quotidien. Et ça se fait aussi naturellement. Et ce qui s'enchaîne derrière, c'est tout l'aspect démocratique. Ce qui est intéressant dans un shed, c'est l'idée que tout le monde est à peu près au même niveau. Il n'y a pas, tout le monde a le droit de parole, tout le monde a le droit de décider. Alors souvent, il y a quand même un leader du groupe qui ressort, mais le leader a plutôt vocation à emmener tout le monde, à recommuniquer et à être une sorte de référent. On parle de leader santé aussi, notamment, par exemple, mais ça peut être, le leader peut être tour à tour une personne différente, parce qu'en vrai, toutes les décisions sont prises ensemble, au final, au quotidien, quoi. Au niveau timing, je ne sais pas, vous me dites si... au final, tout ça, ça permet de recréer les conditions positives et des meilleures conditions pour réintégrer le monde de l'emploi, pour réintégrer une vie sociale, pour réintégrer un meilleur système de santé, en tout cas de soins, d'accès aux soins. Ce n'est pas toujours facile, ce n'est pas si simple que ça. C'est à très longue durée. Nous, on a vu des shaders qui, c'est pas 100% des shaders qui réintègrent un parcours positif, mais en fait, on en voit de nombreux. Nous, les pourcentages sont quand même assez intéressants, qui réintègrent soit des formations, soit de l'emploi, ou soit qui s'investissent aussi dans du bénévolat, c'est-à-dire qu'ils donnent de leur temps parce que, alors, c'est pas qu'ils n'ont pas envie de travailler ou de travailler bénévolement, mais ça se fait naturellement. Ils se disent, bah, tiens, moi, j'ai avancé un petit peu personnellement, et ben, je vais donner de mon temps au centre social ou dans l'association de quartier ou auprès d'une famille. Et ça fait partie de ce processus un peu positif qui se déroule un peu au quotidien à travers ces sheds. Je sais que ça a été testé dans pas mal de régions, ce modèle, et en fonction des régions et de la manière dont on peut le monter, c'est différent. Mais voilà, ce que je peux, pour terminer et conclure, c'est vraiment cet aspect de retour à une vie active qui se travaille au quotidien. Le shed est un vrai outil à cette reprise de ce goût à la vie, de ce lien social. Et quoi de mieux en plus, puisque c'est fait dans les centres sociaux. Et c'est vrai que c'est tout un parcours dans nos structures où on nous propose un certain nombre d'activités. Et c'est une des étapes du parcours qui permet à un moment donné, voilà, à chaque shader de retrouver un peu là, ce goût à la vie, à la liberté, à la démocratie et à l'emploi et à la santé. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, Sullivan. Right. Okay. So that was the men's shed model. So a lot of the basis of what we've been doing over the last 4 years. We'll now go to Hampshire and Natalie Garwin. Natalie and her colleagues at Hampshire have been leading on two of the key additional elements that we've brought into this model around health and employability. And Natalie will tell us a bit more about it now. Natalie, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. So Sylvan has already said, given some information about how the model works together around improved mental well-being and improved employability and improved physical health. Just kind of check, can you see my presentation? Yes, okay. So there's... it's very difficult to unpick these from each other because, as you've heard, by taking part in some shared activities, just by making those connections, you also improve your mental well-being. Also, by making those connections and learning those new skills, you improve your employability. And if you for many men who are perhaps further from the job market, by improving their employability, they also improve their mental well-being. So they really are all connected. The three aims of the SBS model are really around these three things. So physical health, mental health, and employability. I'm going to be talking today about mainly around the physical health and the employability aspect. Okay, so first of all, around physical health, we have a program of health champions. Health champions are shedders who facilitate healthy conversations in SBS sheds and in the wider community. So these are people within the sheds who have volunteered to receive some training around health awareness, specifically around men's health and some of those healthy conversation skills. This is an adaptation of an evidence-based program that we currently have in England called Making Every Contact Count. So this is a method of talking to people to try and help people make their own goals. Now, we have adapted this recognised method into a more informal environment within the shed so that it's more suitable for men to be talking to other men. This is where that comes back to the culture that Sylvain was talking about that sharing with each other and supporting each other. So the training program itself, it's either one full day or 2 half days. We have run it by in person pre-COVID, and since COVID, we've been doing it in 2 half day sessions online. For some areas, it may be better to put it into 3 sections instead. It really is adaptable. It just covers, as long as you cover the same content. One of some of the key things about the Health Champion training is making it clear to the shedders about what their responsibilities are. So we have a Health Champion mantra. It's that they are not responsible for the choices that other people make. It's not their job to fix it. There's always a need for people to fix things, especially in male-focused environments. They want to be able to fix people's problems. But for a Health Champion, that's not the way to go about it. They're also very clear that they're not medical professionals giving advice. But the whole point of the training is to help people explore how asking the right questions can help other people make their own decisions, and that therefore has a much bigger impact on their own personal health improvement. Health champions are, they have quite an important role in setting the culture around health within their sheds. So they may want to encourage other healthy activities to happen. For example, walks, talks, and quite a few of our sheds in Hampshire have decided to make health information stands with lots of readily accessible information. There's also, we've seen an appetite for delivery in other organisations and workplaces. So if not just within SBS sheds, we've seen this in Kent, where lots of other stakeholders have also wanted to be trained as health champions. We've also seen it within the Men's Health Forum, who have trained 160 health champions themselves in organisations such as the police, very male-dominated workplaces. So this is something that really has the potential to improve the health of men in a lot of different situations. Some things we have learned from the Health Champion programme is it's very important to be clear on the expectations of what you're expecting a health champion to do. So at the beginning, health champions thought they had to solve everybody's problems. They had to be on the phone to somebody for hours and hours when they're in crisis. But that's really not fair on the health champion themselves. These are people within the shed who are just supporting others in their shed in a healthy way. So it's very important that the training covers how to manage that kind of relationship. It's also very important to not overcomplicate it for the shedder. They feel a lot more comfortable. They've got to feel comfortable in their role. And that's where we've also learned that it helps to have more than one health champion per shed. These are very much informal conversations that are being had. So the more people trained in health champions and healthy conversations, the more that culture can spread to the rest of the shed. We've also found that in order to sort of really help the training embed within the shed, you need to get the shed leaders on board. So in Hampshire, most of our shed leaders are also health champions, which has helped a long way to sort of facilitate that wider culture around health. We've also found that one of the most valuable things for a health champion themselves is to network with other health champions. So the more of them you have in a local area, the better it is for them to be able to connect with each other. And the more that they connect with other health champions, the easier it is for them to feel like they can continue having these conversations with people within their sheds. It gives them the motivation. It makes them feel like they're not alone. So that's the summary of the Health Champion programme. happy to take questions about specific things later if there are any. Moving on to the employment side, this is where the work of the SBS model is very much integrated with the main model. So when we were first started looking at employment, we found that shedders felt like contributing to something is good for their mental health, but they didn't specifically think of it as a route to employment. They found that gaining new skills is really good, but not just for the unemployed. So we're looking at everybody gaining new skills within the SBS model. The main thing that came out from our early discussions was that having a sense of purpose is the most important thing to the men in our sheds. So they've been able to feel like they are working towards something, helping somebody else, or perhaps contributing to their shed themselves. They also, we recognise within the model itself, there's a huge amount of possibility for people to improve their skills just by interacting with other shedders or by getting involved in shed activities. So the employment model itself is definitely not a formal employment programme. We've learned very early on that the men coming to the sheds are coming for a social interaction. They don't want to be there to be told what to do and to be told they need to get a job or to improve their jobs. It's very much a holistic journey where if somebody wants to improve their skills, they can do. If they don't want to improve their skills, then just by attending, eventually they get the motivation to want to do that. So it really is a step-by-step approach. There are three key aspects of the employment focus. So we have down here improving soft skills through taking part in shed activities and informal learning. This is what Sylvain was talking about, really, where people were coming together, they're sharing their skills, they're improving their confidence and their motivation. I won't go too much into that because that is very much integrated into the main model. We also have holistic coaching, which is more for one-to-one work with individuals. And through that coaching, people can have links to more formal skills in the communities and for more formal sort of courses. And that really does depend individually on what that shedder wants. So that's how the model works. But there are also other things within this that can really take it to the next level. So the sheds replicate an employer environment, and this came out very strongly from the feedback we had from our sheds. That they felt that the shed itself it gives people those skills around timekeeping, improves the communication skills. It means people have to be there at a certain time. They become regulars, and over time they get more and more responsibilities. So the skills matrix itself is just a snapshot of some of the skills that you need to run a shed. So the more people get involved with their shed, the more people can take on these other roles and learn as they go along, and therefore improve their employability. We also have, for going back to the holistic coaching, the skill builders or the employment coaches. In each area can find the best way to describe this within their shed. These are people who have that additional training on employability skills, the impact of mental health and employability and physical health, and they have the training on how to coach people on a one-to-one session. And we found this has really been valuable for those people that really need that extra hand to be able to get towards a workplace. We've had some very good stories coming from our employment leads and our skill builders about how they've coached an individual from a very dark place to full-time permanent employment. So we know that does work within a shed environment. Finally, we do have further resources on these two aspects. So we have documents on the Health Champion programme and how to implement it, and some example training plans. And we have some example training slides that you can use and adapt in other situations. We're saying for the employment model, There's much more information there about how for example, the shed employer works, the way that different sheds can help adapt their sheds to improve the skills of their members, and again, an example training plan. These will be available after the conference. Thank you. Now I will hand over to Phil Lerwell from Wellbeing People. They have been leading on the development of our digital wellbeing tools within the SBS project.
Thank you, Natalie. That was great. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Philip Lerwell. I'm the Sales Director at Wellbeing People, and I've had the pleasure to work on the Step-by-Step project since its launch with a great team of individuals, with people, and a great group of project partners. And I'd like to thank them all for being so good throughout the project and really combining well to work together on the project. I need to share my slides. So I'd like to start today by really sharing some more information about the digital tools and what we've actually been doing within the project itself. As a project partner, Wellbeing People were brought in to bring some of the digital wellbeing tools and our experience of perhaps engaging physically with people in harder to reach communities, especially in the southeast of England. And as we've heard already today, one of the aims of the project was to help individuals within the Sheds model to improve their physical and mental health. So, creating new male-focused community spaces with an emphasis on health also creates new opportunities to use digital tools. The SBS digital wellbeing tools have been developed to help bring proven health check and health improvement technology to the SBS community, improving accessibility to men in harder to reach groups and workplaces. What I'd like to share with you today is how the digital wellbeing tools have been used in the Step-by-Step project. To bring the digital tools to the SBS project in the first place, what we had to do was, firstly, we had to look at how we were going to engage people, and we sort of predominantly used the three things that we can see on the screen now: interactive health kiosks, our Health Amity Roadshow, and the development of an online digital tool for men's sheds for the Step-by-Step project called Step Up. Now, I'd like to start by sharing a bit more information about each of these services and how we've delivered them. So what we have on screen here is one of our interactive health kiosks. Now, these kiosks enable individuals to measure and track some of their key indicators of their well-being, such as weight, body mass index, body fat content, blood pressure, heart rate. The Health Kiosk program also includes a holistic life balance questionnaire, Boomerang, which helps individuals to understand more about their overall well-being and covers many other areas of their lifestyle, up to another 10 categories. So it really is a great way for people to have a snapshot, look at themselves and start understanding more about them and about where they're at with their own well-being. The kiosk is easy and simple way to engage. It's simple to use. It only takes around 10 minutes to complete. So afterwards, once you've been through a health MOT, people are able to take away confidential results, whether it's a printout from the kiosk. They can opt to register to the kiosk and have results emails sent to them with all their information and details. And it could also, they can register online and they can see their results in their personal wellbeing account online. These results also include their levels, how their levels compare with medical standards, and will flag any potential problems such as high blood pressure, provide further pathways of support that are available to them. So we very much tailored the support pathways within line with the project. So where individuals create their health kiosk account, they're also able to track their well-being over time online each time they use the kiosk. The results are added automatically to their online account. As we know, most people like to feel cared for, and for something, so offering something as simple as a HealthMT health check can have a huge impact on individual engagement in their own well-being. As well as an engagement tool, the health kiosk is also a step to discovering any potential underlying health problems. It's a warning system that gives the user the chance to seek medical help if required to do so, or it can be a nudge towards a healthier lifestyle. It was our aim throughout the project to provide individuals with the opportunity to understand more about their own well-being. So at the start of the project, health kiosks were placed at each of our project partners' main centres within France, Belgium, and the Netherlands for shedders, employees, community members, and employees from local businesses to use the kiosks to measure their own well-being. Individuals would then be able to get further support from the centres too. These centres were where the sheds were generally held, so it was an ideal place to put kiosks at the centre so that staff could use and engage shedders throughout the project and use to support them and support the health of their and well-being of their actual shedders on site. In the UK, that worked very differently because the nature of the way the sheds were laid out. The sheds were spread across a much wider range of areas and much smaller in size. So it wouldn't have been cost effective to put just a kiosk within a centre for people to come and use. So what we have pictured on screen here is the HealthMT Roadshow. So we use this with a health kiosk on board to take to the shedders and provide them with an opportunity to take a HealthMT in the comfort of their own shed or their local community centre, wherever they wanted that to be. So again, they were able to use the kiosk with members of our team. They would also get the support of shed leaders and local health specialists. Again, here, individuals would then be signposted onto support. So that might have been to doctors and GPs if required, if they need further support, but also onto local services available, and also through the shed as well, the services available through there. But this method allowed us to travel to shed and engage with individuals that we might not have otherwise engaged with within their own well-being. This HealthMT also enabled us to deliver community engagement events within the local communities to provide the sheds and the SBS, and to promote the SBS project, I should say, realistically. It was great to be out there in the community working, highlighting the sheds that were locally to them and these wonderful services and people doing great work. But we would go into public locations, into outdoor community events, shopping centres, supermarkets, car parks, anywhere really where we were going to get a high level of engagement. And obviously one of the key aims here was to focus on locations experiencing high inequalities so that we could promote the values of the step-by-step model and refer people to their local shed. This invitation was also opened out to local staff, volunteers, employers, businesses. The health and wellbeing benefits of the SBS shed, are really then shared with the local community and businesses, which is really important, for sheds to be able to engage with those local businesses for potential support, maybe recruitment services, equipment that they might want to use, especially if they're woodworking or metalworking, etc. So that is what we've talked about are the two models of how we engage people in the wellbeing through using their health kiosk, using HealthMT Roadshow. The next one is really looking at Step Up. Step Up was a digital wellbeing tool that, working with the partners collaboratively, we were able to build a digital tool that allowed sheds to challenge each other to achieve their goals and take part in some physical activity. And if I take a step back, within the project, one of the aims was to develop a digital tool based on the success of other electronic programs such as Pokemon Go, which indirectly increased people's physical activity. when people engage successfully with a challenge, it can really motivate them to carry out light physical activity, to make healthier food choices, and engage with others to improve their social connection, which does bring about a whole range of other health benefits. The SBS digital tool, Step Up, is web-based and has a user-friendly interface that encourages individuals to take part, with an emphasis being on teamwork, basis rather than just targeting individuals to achieve specific goals. It's that teamwork encourages positive mental health and well-being. All SBS participants are encouraged to use the digital tool, as it enhances their experience and provides many potential health benefits. So Step Up is the place where shedders can easily track their physical, mental and emotional well-being journey. It's also the place where people can take part in individual team challenges, all of which are aimed at helping to improve their well-being. Shed leaders can create teams, leagues can be created to help engage and empower shedders to succeed with their challenges. So what I thought I would do is just take you through some of the sort of key elements of the actual tool. And the tool is now available for shedders to use going forward, and we want to continue that and help people to engage more and to create that healthy competition perhaps, and get active and use the tool for that. So what we have on the screen here is one of the images. So when we go through the health kiosk, we actually create an online account. We can actually link the two together. So the kiosk and the digital tool very much interlinked. So metrics that they might have from the kiosk will then automatically update into the shedder's account. So when they go into their online account, they can actually see their actual health metric results. So they can look in here, they have a range of seeing their blood pressure, their heart rate. They can also do more tests. They can add tests in here. So that gives them the ability to sort of track themselves over the time as well and look back at their history. Within teams, sheds can set up, and either shedders can join themselves, or team captains can set them up if perhaps they don't have access to the internet, or if they don't have an email address, they can set up their own account, or like I say, the shed leaders can do that for them so that they can all take part in the challenge. And that's the real aim, is that sheds will set up their teams and then look to maybe join a league and set up challenges so that they can then start completing their own challenges and maybe have that interaction against other sheds too. The actual challenges, the wellbeing challenges are either predefined. So as you can see on screen here, you can select from a various challenges already set. The predefined challenges are based on healthy eating, physical activity, healthy routines, connection with other shedders. And all predefined activities last for 4 weeks, 28 days. And obviously, there'll be challenges to complete, and they'll be recording how they've got on and adding that in to the system so that they can move forward in their challenge. If shedders would like to create their own challenges, they can do, and they can predefine these. They can set themselves own challenges. They can predefine how long those challenges might be, and they can last from 7 days up to 28 days, a real mix of what they can select there. And again, what we've added in here is a league, so that if people do like to compete against each other and they like to have that competitive edge, they can go head to head here through the leagues, and it provides that perhaps motivation to succeed. Points are awarded by completing challenges. So once a challenge is created and you work through your challenge, you'll be awarded points for completing that challenge, and your team will be awarded points for completing that challenge. And those points then converted into miles, which help the sheds move up and down the league table. It helps them to move from shed to shed, so they're able to travel for different sheds. And once a shed reaches another shed, they can then find out a bit more information about another shed, see what that shed does, where they're located, and they can move around the different areas of the step-by-step project, seeing different sheds and sort of using the challenges as a way to gain more miles, to get around the country and visit different places. And it's that motivation to try and get around all the sheds that hopefully keeps them motivated to continue on their journey. that was a whistle-stop tour of some of the digital wellbeing tools that we've been using and how we've been interacting with them in the project. But obviously, if you would like to know any more about that, you can go onto the SBS landing page for My Wellbeing People account and look at the Step Up tool and use the Step Up tool. But I'd like to thank you all for listening, and now I will hand back to Tom.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you also, Sullivan and Natalie, for your section. So we've now covered the three main delivery aspects of the SBS project. After we take a couple of questions and then have a short break, we'll come back and we'll talk about the evaluation of the project and the learning that's coming out of it. So on the questions, we'll just take a couple now before the break. I'll try and hold over the other ones to tackle in our later session. If you haven't put in a question so far, please do. If possible, use the Q&A function below, because as the chat scrolls by, it becomes easier for us to potentially miss something. So if you've put a question in the chat already and not in the Q&A, during the break or over the next little while, if you're able to put it across in the Q&A, then we'll make sure we don't miss it. But in the meantime, a couple of the questions we've had in. Firstly, a general question, I think, really for Maddie, which has come in primarily from Angela in Gosport, but also Phil and a couple of other people have asked, which is about how we'll be able to share the information related to the webinar, the slides, and generally the communication after this conference. Maddie.
Voilà, donc pour répondre à cette question, sachez, comme vous pouvez le voir, que ce webinaire est donc en train d'être enregistré et il sera prochainement disponible sur notre site internet dédié au projet, donc on vous mettra le lien tout à l'heure, vous le verrez à la fin, donc c'est www.sbs-wellbeing.ue et vous pourrez également y retrouver les présentations qui ont été faites par nos intervenants. Voilà, merci.
Thank you very much, Maddie. Secondly, we've had a couple of questions in, mainly I think aimed at Martin. We'll take one of them now. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through the chat to find it again, Martin. So the questions.
Is it? I think Tom's just, is it just me that can't hear him? I think, well. Right. Well, I think he was going to ask me, are there, okay, you're back. Okay, good. What are you going to ask me? Your sound went off, Tom. Is he back? So I couldn't hear that, Tom. I think we lost you at a critical moment, but I do know that the question that appeared in chat was saying, are there international examples that can look at? Well, I touched on leads. In the English-speaking world, the most accessible examples of national policies are in Ireland and Australia, both of which have had men's health policies sitting alongside women's health policies and then renewed them. In the French-speaking world, the Quebec is the only one I know of. But I would recommend that recently we had a webinar as part of Global Action on Men's Health, where we looked at how people are introducing area a sort of regional and national policies in order to improve men's health. And there's a lot of activity going on around the world on this at the moment. And it's worth maybe listening to that webinar to get the full details. But I'm very happy to maybe post in the chat the links to the Leeds example, maybe the Quebec example, the Irish and the Australian example. In fact, I'll do better than that. There is a link that Global Action on Men's Health has put in place to all the men's health policies around the world and suitable resources, and I'll I'll post that in the chat so that people can access it, and maybe also, yeah. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope that's useful to people.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was great. We've had another question that has come in through the chat, which is around the involvement of sheds and cultural settings, whether there has been any connection between men's sheds and cultural settings, libraries, museums, that kind of thing. And I think, Natalie, in Hampshire, you can answer this for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Alice. So in Hampshire, we do take a very broad view of what a shed is. So we're not just talking about the traditional men's sheds that are around woodworking or metalworking within like a wooden building. We do have sheds in lots of different situations. So we've had a lot of interest from libraries, for example, that want to set up a shed within their library. And when we talk about that type of shed, we're talking about a place where men can come together for a common purpose. So in a library, that common purpose might be something different to woodworking. It could be, for example, coming together for dads and kids club on a Saturday. We have also had a shed within a museum itself. So that shed was created as part of a museum, and their particular role was, the focus of that shed was around restoring old vehicles to display in the museum. Now, those kind of sheds would normally work slightly differently to some of the more autonomous sheds, purely because they would have a member of staff from the museum leading that. So their shed leader would possibly be a member of staff. There's definitely a lot of potential for other types of sheds to also get involved with local cultural initiatives. So when it comes to anything like restoring a vehicle or restoring something that involves a lot of like technical skills or working with tools or just sort of getting more involved in the community, those are ideal situations for sort of either to create a new shed or for existing sheds to engage with their local community. One of the things we try really hard to do within the SBS model is to make those connections or to encourage those connections so that each shed can get involved with local community projects. There's definitely a lot of potential for that to be wider than just sort of wider than what they may be doing within their sheds normally. So, for example, where a shed might be quite happy restoring a sort of something in a local park, once they've developed those skills, there's also lots more potential to be doing more defined projects with perhaps additional funding behind them. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Sorry about my technical issue there. I think I disappeared without warning, but my Zoom's obviously had enough of me for the day. Thank you very much for those questions. We have a number of other questions that we've logged, and we've got another question and answer session later on. If you haven't yet asked a question or you're worried it might have got lost in the chat, pop it in the Q&A and we'll come back to it later. We've now got a 10-minute break. We'll restart on the hour, so 11 o'clock in the UK, 12 o'clock across the channel in most of the rest of Europe. So we'll see you again then, at which point we'll hear about evaluation from our colleagues at Chichester, have some more questions and answers, and talk to another couple of guest speakers before we wrap up for the day. Thank you very much. See you in about 10 minutes. Hello, and welcome back to the second half of the final conference on the step-by-step SBS project. I hope you've been enjoying the event so far. Thanks for the questions that have been coming in. As I say, please put things in the Q&A and we'll try and address them in the slot before we close in around an hour's time. The remaining key area that we want to focus on is around the impacts and the dissemination, and this work's being conducted by a team at the University of Chichester. And I'd like to introduce Ruth, Andy and Simon, who'll talk us through the work so far and some clues as to what will come in the final evaluation, which will be out in the spring of next year. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you, Tom. As Tom indicated, the final evaluation is in preparation. We're still collecting data and we hope to be able to share that at the close of the project. So the findings that we're presenting today are preliminary, and I'd also like to thank a merry team of researchers back at Chichester and beyond who have helped in the collection of this data. So the project at the minute, we have 88 sheds, and you can see here the number of sheds divided by country and also by partner involved in each country. So today we stand at 88, but where we've got to from there is that we started out in 2019 when we did our initial data collection with 49. And here you can see each shed represented as a diamond with the number of shedders in each shed listed where we have that information. This number 49 grew to 71 in 2000 and then grew to a further to the number 88 that we have today. For our evaluation strategy, we've used a number of different techniques across the course of our initial collection and then to the end point. We've used a combination of online surveys with both shed leaders and shed members, and we have then attended the sheds in person when we could, but we've also conducted some of our interviews over Zoom as a result of the restrictions with the pandemic. When we've been out with sheds, we've also observed what they have been doing within the sheds. We have talked to shedders, to shed leaders, to champions, health champions, and we have also conducted a number of different techniques, one of which I'll share with you next when we look at the sheds and their communities. So the community asset mapping is a way for us to see how well placed each shed is within their local community. So we asked shed leaders to list the other agencies or individuals that they have an association with that help in the operation of their shed. And you can see here we have a new shed that listed 9 connections to other individuals or organisations. The thickness of the line between the shed and that other asset is indicating the closeness of that relationship. The size of the symbol indicates the frequency of contact that they have. As you can see there, the colour indicates who contacted who first. So red indicating the shed has reached out to another asset, whereas yellow indicates it's a mutual contact and blue indicating that it's the asset that has contacted the shed. Shape then just indicates the nature of the relationship in terms of how they communicate. So at the start, when we were collecting a lot of baseline, we saw a lot of person-to-person contact, whereas now we are seeing much more multiple contacts as a result of having to use remote communication. So this is a small shed as it's newly established. Here we have a slightly more established shed that has a lot more contacts. But what you also see with this shed is that there is much more understanding of how the assets communicate to each other. So here the shed leader is able to see the connections between different elements within their network and thereby better understand how their network can help to further the work of the shed. We went back to this shed then at a later date and we asked them about the network And you can see here that a number of those initial contacts have been lost to their network. And we asked why that was, and it was a case that those initial contacts helped to establish the shed, to find funding, to find equipment. And those contacts were lost and they were replaced with other newer contacts who provided other services. So part of this process, we looked at what function was provided. So you can see here that support to establish the shed was sought, and that related to providing premises. It also related to their membership of the SBS project, but also they sought a lot of funding for independent purposes. As they've moved into being more established, the sheds have sought ongoing support both from their partner within the SBS project, but from other sheds, both those that are involved in SBS, but also those sheds that may be around them that aren't. And they've also then linked in with sheds associations, both local and national. They also have reached out and made links of referral networks to increase their membership from health services, doctors, charities, and other social prescribing agencies. And then the last category that we have is really the ongoing work. And the sheds have reached out and they complete community projects on behalf of local schools, primarily primary schools, clubs and organisations, local businesses, and just individual members of the public. And then they've also made links with local press, local radio, and other organisations that can advertise their work. But they have also then linked in with the Shed Association as a way to, again, advertise what it is that they're doing. So when we talked to the shed leaders about how they had become a leader, some had been the instigator of setting up the shed, whereas others emerged from within the shed membership and volunteered for that role when it was vacant. Others had been nominated by the management team, asked to take on the role, whereas others had merely seen the gap and then filled it. We then asked the shed leaders about lessons that they had learnt and what they would pass on to other shed leaders. And what they shared with us was the need to understand management structures, how to facilitate workshops. They stressed the importance of supporting member wellbeing and sharing their own journey so that shedders that were part of their shed could learn from them as individuals. They saw a number of personal benefits which were really around their own self-identity. So a sense of achievement, a sense of purpose, satisfaction in seeing the shed and other shedders thrive around them. And that led to enhanced well-being and a sense of being connected, both within and out with the shed. They did face a number of challenges that they reported, but as you can see by the quote at the bottom, with great frustration comes great joy. So they talked about the challenges around providing enough activities, coping with interpersonal conflicts within the shed, gaining commitment of members beyond just turning up, and then negotiating with organisations to provide resources for the shed. And if they were to offer advice to new shed leaders, they said, be persistent, learn from those around you who have been through that journey before you, be flexible, understand that different shedders will come to the shed for different reasons, and don't put yourself under pressure. Learn to enjoy the journey. So we looked then at who leads and who follows. So who are the shed leaders and the membership? And what we saw was that leaders reflected their membership. So in terms of key demographics, they're actually quite similar. We then looked at age across the different regions, and we saw that members of sheds in Belgium and Arc and Roubaix in France were much younger. Waterloos and The Hague, so Waterloos in France and the Netherlands sheds, they tended to be around middle age, And then we saw a much older demographic within the two UK regions of Hampshire and Kent. And when we looked at gender, the concept is around men's sheds, and so it was no surprise that most of the sheds were occupied by men. But you can see here that we do have a number of females represented within the sheds. Marital status then needs to be understood in terms of that information that I shared with you by age. So we see many more single people reported in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands than we do in the UK. And in terms of employment status, again, this is a byproduct of age. So we see that many more in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands are seeking employment, whereas in the UK, we see many more retired people who aren't interested in seeking employment at this stage. So we asked shed leaders about their thoughts around the model and what benefit that brought to their work. And they did all report that they saw a value of the model. It was in terms of the structure that this provided, a way to organise their thinking about how the shed would operate. They emphasised that they liked the subtle nature of helping people to change their health behaviours. So learning from others, and rather than explicit classes, if you like. And they saw value behind the brand of being associated with a particular type of shed, and in this case, the SBS shed. The other issues that we saw were around raising health issues, and a number of the men, particularly in the UK, reported issues around prostate cancer awareness came through. But it was this idea of what the men's sheds movement refers to as shoulder to shoulder or peer support. So that idea of knowing that issues that were coming up were really something that somebody else had travelled along before. And so having reassurance that they too could get through those issues. Health champions also provided this idea of a meaningful conversation. So being able to pick up on what we call change talk, or people willing to make some element of change and then be able to provide them with the necessary tools or signposts to guide them to further support. So it's very much about being proactive, initiating action, rather than sitting and being reactive. And the health champions themselves reported that by doing the training, they were more self-aware around their own health, and so were taking necessary steps to improve it. In terms of employment then, the detail here is presented in terms of a narrative or stories. What we saw were a number of men, in particular young men, coming into the shed with low levels of confidence, learning the skill, and then having the confidence through that mentorship to be able to apply for jobs and secure employment. Some other shedders had jobs, but they were doing relatively unskilled work in their eyes. They came to the shed, learnt new tools or new skills, and then were able to go back into their jobs that they currently had, but to take on more responsibility. And again, that led to elevations in confidence and competence. And finally, then, we also saw examples where men had significant health problems and were finding their traditional treatment or therapy frustrating. They came to the shed, became occupied with other skills, and then were able to think about themselves as, rather than being sick, as potential employees. So they changed their mindset. So that's what our leaders have shared with us. I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to talk to you about our evaluation of the shedder's health.
Excuse me. So we've got these 4 main outcomes that we were looking to seek through the evaluation of the project. Physical health and activity was monitored via the EQ5D5L and the International Physical Activity Questionnaire. Mental wellbeing via the Warwick-Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. Social inclusion via a self-report, and skills employability via the Career Adaptability Scale. So first of all, why does a member join a shed? Typically, a member is prompted to join a shed either by a spouse or a loved one, or even the leader themselves. They attend for social reasons, looking to engage in a greater number of social activity and enhance their social relationships. Many shedders are interested in the activities that are on offer and an opportunity to share existing skills and work together. Some see the shed as providing them with a greater availability of facilities than they are used to at their own sheds or their own workshops at home. And often shedders would say that they were offered an opportunity to have something to do, to fill their time with the day and to be more productive. For physical health, we looked at the EQ5D5L, which monitors mobility, self-care, usual activities, pain and discomfort, and anxiety and depression. And from answering those different items, we are produced with a health status from 0 to 1, with 1 being the best possible health. As we can see here, the index there from time point 1 to end point actually was lower from the first time point to the second. And similarly with the health score, the greater people revealed a lower health score in the end point, but only marginally. However, when we ask them directly about health change, we see that there's minimal health decline, with the majority of people noticing an absence of health decline or an increase in their physical health. How the shed has facilitated this is via increased physical activity, links to kind of general well-being and quality of life in terms of giving a purpose, and being able to talk to others about their issues and feeling more comfortable to do so. Others mentioned that it gave them something to look forward to get up and get going. And others with more specific injuries or illnesses, they were able to get out of the house after operations and get engaged with the shed. For BMI, we can see that across the majority of the locations, there has been a decrease in BMI from time point 1 to time point 2. The only increase had come from Kortrijk in Belgium. However, there was only 1 individual at this point who has completed that survey. For the different categories of BMI, we can see that there has been a decrease in those that have reported being within the obese category, and they have dropped down into being an overweight category. So we see a greater number of individuals reporting overweight in the endpoint. In terms of physical activity, we can see a greater number of individuals reporting they are meeting their guidelines from the World Health Organization. And in terms of activity levels, we see that a greater number of people report high intensity activity than they did in time point 1. Again, when we're asking them directly, we see very minimal reductions in physical activity, with the majority noticing an absence of decline in terms of their physical activity, or that increase in physical activity across the project. And this was facilitated by being able to walk a lot more at the shed than they were used to, being encouraged to exercise via the shed's membership, improved body strength, feeling more active than they were when they were working, and an increase in motivation, which was also mentioned as a can-do attitude, which in turn helps physical health. So we kind of see a link between these two. In terms of mental well-being, the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, we can see that between time point 1 and time point 2, that the shed membership still fall within that moderate category of moderate well-being, with some changes between the specific locations. In terms of the categories, we can see that there has been a greater number of individuals that have reported moderate well-being from at end point than they were at time point 1, with fewer people reporting high and a greater number of people marginally reporting low. Again, when we ask them directly, we see that change is more prominent and with well-being. People are noticing an increase in their well-being from attending the shed, which this again has been facilitated by the shed itself. This was mentioned as being more aware of how to improve their well-being, giving a focus or a sense of purpose, increased skills or learning new skills, and then specifically focused on mental health and specific symptoms of mental health and improved self-esteem. One individual said that they become more aware of themselves, and that's helped them to feel better. In terms of social engagement, we can see a great increase in social engagement from being involved in the shed, and an increase in social relationships. And this has been facilitated by meeting new people, doing things together, increased number of social gatherings, getting help and social support or peer support from their members, widening their group of social relationships, increased confidence to speak to others, realizing that they can help with their difficulties by gaining support from others, and also focusing their conversations on health and mental health. From the interviews, we noticed a couple of themes with regards to social activity. Firstly, we had socializing with others, where people were engaged with one another and liaising with their peers within the shed with regards to activities, and forming a greater network. And also a community engagement, where individuals were more connected with their community and linking in with their local neighborhood. This person had mentioned that they don't believe they would have that connection if it wasn't for being involved. The skills and employability, from the career adaptability scale, we have 4 items: concern, control, curiosity, and confidence. During the endpoint evaluation, we can see for each of those items, there's a slight reduction in terms of compared to time point 1. However, they are very, very marginal. And similarly, when we then ask them directly about skills changes, we can see that the majority of individuals notice that their skills is enhanced, and they've gained a skill upskilling from being involved within the shed. This is facilitated by engaging with professionals at the shed, advice that they gain from other shedders. Knowledge and understanding of different health conditions has enhanced that skill set, some different from practical skills. Engaging with new tools and watching others and gaining assistance from others, and having opportunities to try new things. In terms of employability, there was less of an increase here, with majority of individuals noticing no change in their employability status. However, as we mentioned, there's a great number of, particularly in the UK, of older adults. But those that did mention an increase in employability, they noticed that was because of increased roles and responsibilities that they gained at the shed, an increase in their general well-being, which therefore means they feel more employable. The mental health improvements, feeling more stable at their own job, and being able to feel more calm in their job. For the top point there was an individual who said that there was no change to their employment status. However, they felt that they would be more able to return to their job if they had to. They could still do the job now that they once did, having been involved in the shed. And I'll hand you over now to Simon, who's going to talk us through the economic evaluation. I wonder if Simon's got muted. I can't quite hear him.
My apologies. It was my mute button. So thank you, Andy, for that. Yes, I'm going to provide what is a short summary of the economic evaluation. We have got a bigger document, but as Ruth intimated earlier, we will be evaluating that in the light of the data as it comes in. I'm first going to discuss a bit about the method chosen, and then to actually discuss the model for the evaluation, and then to look at the case study that we did of Hampshire. So firstly, cost effectiveness analysis is quite common for a business perhaps, or accountants, let's say, to conduct what you might call an investment appraisal, or a project appraisal, where you look at the cost of the proposed project, and then you have specified criteria for effectiveness. So with health, for example, it could be that there are fewer cardiac arrests per 1,000 of the population. And so you're weighing up or measuring the financial cost with the health benefit. We decided that whilst that's really useful, we feel that many partners plus other aspects of the University of Chichester's submission will be contributing to that debate. And so we decided not to do a cost-effective analysis. Another approach could be a cost-benefit analysis, which is similar to an investment appraisal cost-effectiveness approach. This is where rather than having benefits using different criteria, every single benefit is given a monetized value. And so the overall benefits are monetized, even if some of those benefits might be subjective. For example, improvement in well-being would be given a financial value. And so therefore you would weigh up the cost of the project in the light of what the monetary benefits are. However, decided not to do a cost-benefit analysis, partly because the sheds largely are self-financing in terms of receiving donations from ad hoc groups and so forth. And so it's kind of not really appropriate to consider it as a impact from the back of what is an initial expenditure. So instead, we've chosen to do an income effect analysis. And the reasoning for this really is that it's more of what people expect from an economic evaluation, because we're trying to see what is the impact of the SBS project on actual employment, which then generates incomes and output and so forth, output changes. And in particular, we're looking at what we might call autonomous investment or autonomous employment. Autonomous employment is that jobs have been created that would otherwise not have been created. So we're looking at that net additional effect, if you like, to the output or the output and income of an economy from the SBS sheds. So, okay, I've kind of put together some coefficients here, some ideas of what actual effect will a typical shed of, let's say, 20 members, what kind of is a realistic expectation of the employment. And I've suggested here, these coefficients, by the way, are all subject to change. It's kind of a bit like a deductive model in the sense that we put forward a hypothetical model and then we can adjust the actual coefficients according to the data and that we receive. Okay, so the assumption we've made is that there will be a 3% increase in new jobs and therefore income created as a consequence of all of the things that various people, Natalie and Ruth and Andy, have all talked about in terms of improving skills, employability, networking, self-esteem, etc. So a 3%, we've assumed a 3% increase in jobs, and that's 3% of actual shedders. We've also said that the overall benefits of greater participation, social networks, and also economic infrastructure changes will actually lead to a productivity increase. Now, we've got a figure here of 0.00038%, which might look a little random, but we've kind of, there is a reasoning behind that, which we haven't got time to go into now. So given those coefficients, we also are assuming that the SBS project will not only have an effect on a regional GDP or a regional economy, but it will also have an effect on the national government spending, public spending. And with all of the health benefits that Andy reported, even though some of the measures look like there've been a slight decline, the overall impression from the responses is that there is a positive health impact, physical and mental. And so that positive impact, we've given a value of 3% per capita health expenditure per shedder. So for every shedder, we're assuming that that shedder will experience a 3% reduction in the overall per capita health expenditure. Okay, so if we could move on, Andy, thank you. So here are the findings that we've concluded. If we look at the county of Hampshire, we currently have 45 sheds. So based on the measurement for average regional income, we've deducted monies that would be otherwise received, let's say from welfare benefits, and we've looked at a net increase in income. We've then said that that net income will be subject to what economists call multiplier effects, and we've given a rather conservative estimate of the multiplier of 1.5. So what this results in, with 45 sheds in Hampshire, we can expect the regional GDP, and by regional GDP change, I also mean a sustainable change, that it will be a sustainable change to the regional economy. We estimate this will lead to a sustainable change in income of £1 million. However, if the shed movement increases, which we fully expect it to, given the current growth of sheds, and we've estimated a certain saturation point of number of sheds per proportion of the population, and come up with a figure of 1,206 sheds for Hampshire. This is based on the resident population. We're assuming, we've assumed, for example, that 1 in 5 people that are seeking work, unemployed, will be attracted to join a shed, and that 1 in 20 retired people will be attracted to join a shed. And we've just purely used that percentage. That's how we've come up with that figure. Well, if there were a more saturated quantity of sheds, then we can expect a difference to regional income of around 28 million. If that were to be scaled up on a national basis, we are looking at a figure in the region of £500 million. Now, if we add to that figure of £500 million the national fiscal effect, how much health expenditure is saved as a consequence of each shedder, we have a further £91,000. With 1,006 sheds for Hampshire, that then increases to £2.5 million. And if you were to look at that at a UK level, we're looking at around about £48 million. Well, finally, we also gave an estimation of the increase of productivity, which leads to increased output effectively through efficiency. And we've estimated that there will be a sustainable effect if we were to look at the Hampshire region of a further £1.33 million. For a fully mature shed movement in Hampshire, we can expect that figure to jump to £34 million contribution to productivity. And if it was scaled up to the UK, we would be looking in the region of 0.7 of a billion. So, okay, I hope that gives you some sort of idea of what the financial effects in the economy would be. But just a final point to make here. The actual monetary benefit or the output benefit is quite marginal. Even if you had a fully scaled up project, it is marginal in terms of GDP. However, that, of course, is disregarding the hundreds of positive effects that the shed movement will bring. So that although it will be a marginal impact on GDP, all of the other positive effects need to be considered as well. And also, we need to note that because the sheds are self-financing, this is a zero cost, if you like, to the public purse. This really is a win-win situation. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Simon. So what are the headlines from our evaluation to date? So the main thing really is that the SBS model has value. Leaders and members have a similar demographic. Community connections matter with regards to the sheds and their local communities. Shed leaders can be found via a range of different strategies. Shed involvement is positive for health, according to the shedders, and we can see a positive economic impact. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Andy. So the next stage, what we're going to show you are some short videos that have been made by the shed members. So if we could run that video, please.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Julien, j'ai 45 ans. Je fais partie du shed d'Anvers depuis le mars 2021. Avant, j'étais seul au domicile, quasi inactif, peu de relations sociales. Et là, maintenant, j'ai trouvé un groupe, une activité, et c'est passionnant. Aujourd'hui, dans le shed, je pense que mon rôle, je me retrouve, c'est d'être un élément moteur, oui. Alors, si je devais résumer SBS en 3 mots, ce serait communauté, projet et partage. Alors, mon meilleur souvenir chez SBS, c'est quand j'ai enfin vu ce premier projet de jardinière terminé. Là, on avait accompli quelque chose. Alors après SBS, dans mon idéal, oui, c'est que ça continue de manière autonome, tout simplement.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Mickaël, j'ai 40 ans. Je fais partie du shed La Palette Arquoise depuis 2 ans déjà. Avant, j'étais timide, solitaire et je ne voyais pas beaucoup de personnes. Grâce à SBS, je suis beaucoup plus épanoui, je rencontre du monde et beaucoup plus impliqué dans les associations. Mon rôle dans le shed, c'est shed leader, donc pour accompagner les personnes qui veulent travailler pour les aider. SBS en 3 mots, convivial, diversité et famille. Mon meilleur souvenir sur SBS, c'est la nuit des Vikings. On a fait pas mal de taf pour faire la forteresse en bois, mais c'était super à faire. Après SBS, je verrais bien, pourquoi pas une micro-entreprise, pour dire que tout ce qu'on a fait là perdure moins de temps.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Robert, j'ai 32 ans. Je fais partie du shed La Palette Arquoise depuis 4 ans. Avant, j'étais timide, réservé et je n'avais pas confiance en moi. Grâce à SBS, j'ai pris confiance en moi, je suis moins réservé et j'ai appris à connaître de nouvelles personnes. Mon rôle dans le shed, c'est d'aider le shed leader et aussi de motiver les troupes à venir aux ateliers. SBS, en 3 mots, c'est découverte, apprentissage et bonheur pour vous. Mon meilleur souvenir dans SBS, c'est le jour où on a été écopé le bar. Certes, on a galéré, mais on s'est bien amusé. Après SBS, je vais me mettre à fond dans mon permis, trouver du travail et aussi continuer à faire des ateliers au centre social.
Ik ben altijd bezorgd. Ik ben 53 jaar oud. Ik ben van Marokkaanse afkomst. Ik ben getrouwd, ik heb 4 kinderen, ik kom van een groot gezin. Ik heb gestudeerd als architect voordat ik hier kwam. In Marokko, ik had een kledingwinkel en tussen dit, ik heb een jaren als bodyguard gewerkt. En het was een perfect leven en alles was echt hoe die hoort. Ik heb nooit gedacht dat ik ga naar Europa of iets, maar door mijn liefde, ik ben hier verhuisd. Eerst, ik heb in Lochem gewoond. Ik heb 12,5 jaar in Lochem gewoond. En door mijn werk in Noord, ik heb naar Den Haag verhuisd. Ik heb een huis gekregen in Schilderswijk. Iedereen vindt het helemaal vreselijk. Maar ik was echt tevreden van. De eerste week dat ik hier gewoond, is ze opgebroken bij mij. En alles was ravage daar en alles is kapot. En ik was in stress en ik heb een paar weken niet naar mijn werk geweest, omdat ik was echt door stress. En ik dacht dat alles wat de familie heeft gezegd over het Schilderswijk, dat is echt gevaarlijk, dat is een jungle, dat is alles. Maar gelukkig, ik heb er doorheen gegaan. Ik heb vrijwilliger in de mussen gedaan door mijn vrouw, omdat mijn vrouw heeft mij gezegd dat moet ik iets doen met mijn leven. We zijn nu in het vadercentrum. In het vadercentrum hebben wij genoeg ambassadeurs, ik ben een van hun. Wij ontvangen hier mensen met problemen en wij helpen mensen met papier, en, ook met woningbouw of belastingdienst. We trekken mensen van huis uit. Door de bussen, ik heb een plezier nu. En ik heb met mijn leven doorgegaan omdat ik, dit is een tweede huisje. Er wordt een tweede huisje voor mij.
Hi, I'm Chris Hodgson from Fairmen Shed, and I'm talking to you at the moment from our recreational area within our shed. We found the initiative very helpful and informative. The Hampshire Man booklet's been very well received by our members and has initiated a few unplanned discussions over a cup of coffee in the room where I am now. The training that Step to Step project offered was very good, and our members taken part in the Health Champion and skill building courses. Back in June we had a visit from the health kiosk and a total of 32 attended, which included some wives. The general feeling was, well, it only told us what we already knew, we're all overweight, but some of them did take it on board. Two of them found they had high blood pressure, so one of them has purchased their own blood pressure monitoring machine now, and 3 have consciously just tried and are losing weight and starting to be better hydrated. The monthly leaders meeting I found very interesting, as all groups, no matter who they represent, are sharing the same problems due to lockdown, and it's interesting to hear how they approach the problems and reshaping the way in which they operate. Fairmen Shed hope that the Men's Activity Network continues for some time, and last but not least, we'd like to thank them for the £686 grant we received in January, which has provided us with a new pillar drill. So thank you very much, Step by Step.
As part of the community group, I've undertaken a number of weeks of training. Part is skills, how to speak, how to talk to people, how to sell the message. Other things have been about health training, so that if somebody has got a problem, I've got some skill in finding a place for them to look, a signpost, a place to follow up with. These things are all good, but they are not everything. The idea of the Men's Shed is that we have a reason to get up in the morning. We connect with people around us. We're active in the sense that we're doing something, even if it's only building a display cabinet like this one, or like Sam with his bird boxes, and Roger with his pens, and all sorts of other things that we do. And as such, the Men's Shed has a wide variety of things that we get up to. Roger helped me to build this. And we go out and we talk to all sorts of people. So we're not just directly involved with the shed, we're actually involved with the wider community. We've gone out and done a lot of major events, including Chris Evans's Car Fest, where we help raise funds for children in need. Plus we get our message out there. This is going to be hopefully a newsletter which will stand in the shed so that people can look at it, see it, and then hopefully I will get the local doctors proscribing people to forward on things like the Hampshire Health Forum booklet, which will then be available to the members of the shed to have a look at, take home with them, as activities and places to find more information about Health Forum workshops and stuff.
Hello, I'm Adrian Duckett. I'm chair of New Milton Men's Shed. We've been involved with the SBS programme since January 2019, and it was valuable to be involved with the SBS programme at the same time we were trying to establish our own men's shed. We were able to dovetail the principles of men's sheds nationally with the SBS model, and that proved to work really well and has formed a skeleton for our 5-year plan. That plan has utilised the SBS training programme, which has given us much needed specialist help that we didn't have within our shed. The Health Champion training provided insight into how to guide and advise specifically men to understand and identify and seek health advice. It was proving positive pre-pandemic and is now beginning to provide support and culture coming out of the pandemic. And that culture that it's okay to talk about your health problems. This is being seen both in our workshop and our social gatherings. Guys are much more open to those sorts of discussions. I think they feel safe to talk about those things. It's made them more aware of the importance of men's health. The training quality, both the face-to-face sessions and the online sessions, were received very positively by the 4 members that undertook that training. The marketing training, Reaching and Engaging Men, provided excellent guidance for us to promote and recruit. And the one-to-one session was especially valuable for us to focus on our shed needs and its opportunities, enable us to prepare for the future, for the new developments that we want to undertake, and the generational development changes that happen to our demographic of the membership. So we feel really prepared now going forward that we can engage with men in the right way. So to summarise then, SBS programme has been incredibly valuable to me as a shed leader and to the shed as a whole, and my hope is that it thrives and continues to support men's activity groups in the future, and that it's valued and protected by local government.
Hallo, ik ben Jonas. Ik ben als hobby ben ik smid en via Step by Step ben ik terechtgekomen bij bouwwerk, waar dat ik de jongens ook, de andere jongens van Step by Step heb leren kennen. En waardoor dat ik ook meer sociaal contact heb beginnen krijgen van die gasten, waar dat ik ook hun skills gezien en waar dat ik kan van bijleren. Iedere zaterdag kom ik smeden, dus ik ben ook fysiek bezig, waardoor ik mij ook steeds vaker beter voel ook buiten mijn job. Nu kan ik ook iedere zaterdag komen ontspannen, smeden met de andere jonge gasten en de gasten van Step by Step. Die hebben ook een bepaalde skillset waar dat ik super graag van bijleer, waar dat ik ook mezelf kan verbeteren. Eigenlijk een beetje afkijken dat ik doe. En af en toe een keer uitleg vragen, hoe doe je dat? En dan zo kan ik dat zelf ook leren. Via bouwwerk en het Step-by-Step programma heb ik meegedaan aan een wedstrijd waar dat het thema een klok was. Ons idee was dan samen met andere smids om een zonnewijzer te maken. Die staat hier. Die is zo goed als af. Daar ben ik toch ook wel redelijk trots op. Dat we dat allemaal samen kunnen maken. En ik ben het bouwwerk ook zeer dankbaar dat ik de plaats kan gebruiken. ook via Step by Step.
Dus ik ben Aaron, 25 jaar. Ik heb productontwerp gestudeerd. En momenteel heb ik een eigen bedrijfje opgestart. Ben ik zelfstandig bijberoep als ene karkas. Waarin ik probeer ideeën eigenlijk fysiek te maken. Dat kan gaan van een render tot iets super technisch, tot een framework maken. Maar het idee is eigenlijk om zo organisaties te helpen ondersteunen vanuit mijn bijberoep. Daarin laat ik mij begeleiden door bolwerk, specifiek door Ruben, die dan mijn Peter eigenlijk is. En hij helpt mij daarin om dan de juiste connecties te maken, te zorgen dat de factuur goed opgesteld wordt. En zo heb ik al een paar opdrachtjes mogen doen dit jaar en komen er wel nog een paar aan. Dus ik was al even op zoek naar een soort van legaal kader om een soort van bijberoep op te starten. En via het step-by-step platform ben ik dan hier terechtgekomen bij Bolwerk, waarin dat ik dan Ruben heb leren kennen. En Ruben zit eigenlijk ook in het soortzelfde netwerkje waar ik zou willen in bewegen. In een soort van community van sociaal, cultureel, creatieve partners hier in Kortrijk. En het feit dat hij daar al in zit en dat ik daar ook wel ergens een deeltje wil van uitmaken, is dat heel goed qua wisselwerking tussen ons. Via de employment training van Step by Step heb ik dan ook de kans gehad om mijzelf daarin te gaan verdiepen. En dan ben ik ook zo gegroeid in mijn bijberoep hier in Kortrijk.
Wonderful. It's lovely to see some of our shedders talking about their experience and the value that SBS and sheds have had for them. And thank you very much to Community in France, De Mussen in the Netherlands, Hampshire in the UK, and Bolwerk in Belgium, and their shedders for those videos. So we've got a brief moment for a couple of questions before we hand over to our last two keynote speakers. So, the first question we've got in is for the evaluation team, and I think Ruth's going to take it. And the question here from Jim is, given the demographics shared by Chichester colleagues, what can the UK sheds learn from the continental ones about recruiting younger people and vice versa? Sorry, that's the wrong question for you. I must apologise. Another question from Jim was, the measurement tools showed a decline in physical and mental health. Do you have any thoughts about this? Since men's actual comments suggested the opposite.
Thanks very much for the question, Jim. What we've seen realistically is cross-sectional evidence. So the men that were involved in the evaluation at baseline, some of them have carried over and conducted the follow-up, but there are many more new men into that follow-up evaluation because of the turnover of shed members. Therefore, what we can conclude is that the men at the minute have slightly lower self-reported health in terms of the measures that we've used than before. And given the pandemic that we've gone through, although that's not an excuse, but we would have expected to see some decline as a result of that. So in the endpoint evaluation, what we tried to do was to accommodate for this blip in our national health, is to then add in the question about how the shed has changed practice. And what we see is a much more favourable response in terms of self-report, in terms of an index of change. And we see the change being positive in that direction. Hope that answers your question. We will be looking at it within the analysis and trying to disentangle some of that evidence in our final analysis.
Thank you, Ruth. And we did have another interesting question in from Jim, which I initially confused there, around the learning from the UK and the other sheds. I'm not sure we can easily address this here on this call because we can't easily do a kind of a panel discussion of it. But I think it's something that we can probably get back to you about separately. But we have one other question in for Martin, and I'm just scrolling up to find it again, which is, Martin, have you seen any trends in men's health over time, particularly around premature mortality and preventable illnesses?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a dramatic improvement in men's health and women's health over time. And one of the reasons that...
Martin, sorry to interrupt you. I think your microphone isn't positioned.
Right. Okay.
That's
yeah.
Better.
There's been sorry about that. There's been a dramatic improvement in men's health over time and in women's health, and one of the reasons for the gap, the life expectancy gap declining between men and women is because it's been in conditions that are particularly prevalent amongst men. So there's been big improvements in heart disease, deaths from heart disease or reductions, and similarly in cancer, and also something which is both of which are more common amongst men, and also industrial accidents, for example, have dramatically declined over time. There hasn't been the same improvement in suicide, although there was a small improvement in 2020 compared to 2019. But that is still an area of concern, because there's a very strong link between unemployment, for example, and male suicide. And if we see economic problems coming out of COVID, then that could be a real problem. And there is another longer term trend, which we think we need to think about, which is the sort of ever increasing rates of obesity and being overweight amongst men, which is feeding into things like diabetes and other related problems. So, you know, there are definite improvements over time, but there are still obviously lots of challenges ahead, and there are still also these dramatic inequalities between different men as well. And these problems, such as, for example, obesity, are concentrated in particular groups. I mean, the one other factor which I should mention has dramatically improved things is the reduction in smoking has had a large and positive effect, which is not to be underestimated as well. And that effect has also been bigger amongst men because historically men smoked much more than women, although that gap has almost totally disappeared.
Thank you very much, Martin. We've had a couple of other questions in via the question and answer widget, which we don't have the time to answer now. However, we have logged them. We've got the contact details of participants that answer them, and we'll get back to them in due course. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sorry we haven't got time for any more questions live on the session now. It's a shame we're not all together in a room to be able to actually have more of an engaged panel discussion. So we have two speakers to bring us to a close today. Firstly, Thierry Coulon, who is the General Manager of the Nord-Pas-de-Calais Community Centres Federation, who's an expert in the fields of social inclusion and development and in empowering vulnerable people, as well as partnership coordination and public outreach. So Thierry, how would you like to help us bring to a close our session today?
Oui, merci. D'abord, félicitations à tout le monde hein, sur ce projet qui est remarquable, alors qui est remarquable à plusieurs degrés. D'abord parce qu'il continue à prouver que le lien entre inégalité sociale, inégalité d'accès aux soins et inégalité dans l'accès à l'emploi est une réalité. En France, on a, mais pas qu'en France, d'après ce que je comprends, on a tendance aujourd'hui à poser uniquement les politiques d'accès à l'emploi sur la problématique de on doit rechercher un emploi, donc on va se centrer sur l'accès à l'emploi. Donc sur comment on va faire un CV, comment on va accompagner l'emploi dans la relation aux entreprises. Or, on voit bien, et vous l'avez prouvé, qu'il y a un certain nombre d'autres éléments qui sont à prendre en compte, et notamment les éléments en termes de santé. L'entrée qui est prise et qui est assez remarquable dans l'échelle, c'est de dire on va redonner aux personnes ce que nous on appelle du pouvoir d'agir, du développement de leur pouvoir d'agir, c'est-à-dire comment ils vont reprendre la main sur leur existence, sur leur vie, sur leur quotidien, pour après pouvoir repartir un peu mieux dans la collectivité, dans la communauté, dans la société et vers la santé. Donc, je pense que cette entrée-là, elle est assez remarquable. Il faut qu'on vous avez prouvé que ça fonctionne, aussi bien, certes, sur l'amélioration de la santé, mais amélioration de la santé dit également amélioration dans la relation avec les autres. Et les témoignages des shaders étaient assez remarquables parce qu'elles vont prouver comment on s'est remobilisé entre nous pour après mieux se remobiliser dans la société et vers les autres. Donc, il y a des choses qu'il faut encore creuser. Notre réseau des centres sociaux, par exemple, dans le Nord-Pas-de-Calais, de 175 centres sociaux, a une habitude de dire qu'il faut qu'on retravaille sur la réalité et sur la remobilisation des personnes pour mieux exister dans la société, je pense qu'on va essayer, nous, de s'appuyer sur les expériences de Arc et de Waterloo pour dire, voilà, il y a une entrée là qui est assez intéressante et comment on va convaincre également les partenaires publics de dire qu'il faut dans les politiques publiques d'accès à l'emploi retravailler de manière globale. Tout à l'heure, un intervenant avait parlé de parcours. Voilà, c'est pas un chemin simple et linéaire. Il faut travailler de parcours avec des différentes étapes. Le SHED est une réponse, et pas la réponse à tout, mais en tout cas, est une réponse qui me semble pertinente. Il faut sortir un peu d'une idée, même si je n'aime pas le mot employabilité, parce qu'il y a un certain nombre de consonances un peu négatives par rapport aux personnes. En tout cas, il faut sortir de l'idée que il y a des gens qui ne sont plus, j'ai entendu des élus dire, notamment sur les personnes titulaires, allocataires du RSA en France, il y a des personnes qui sont inemployables, c'est-à-dire qu'ils sont inemployables. En gros, ça ne vaut pas le coup d'investir sur elles, puisque elles ne retrouveront pas une place à part entière dans la société. Vous avez prouvé, et bien sûr, il faut certainement encore affiner, vous avez prouvé en tout cas qu'il y a des entrées et que cette assertion de dire qu'il y a des gens qui sont définitivement en dehors, ce n'est pas vrai. Voilà. En tout cas, félicitations à tous et je pense que on peut réellement s'appuyer des deux côtés de la mer du Nord sur cette expérience pour dire qu'il y a d'autres voies à emprunter en termes d'innovation sociale et qui peuvent marcher et sortir de cette idée que l'accès à l'emploi ne passe que par des conseillers emploi, des conseillers qui vont travailler que sur la dynamique emploi et pas sur un certain nombre de freins périphériques dans la vie des personnes. En tout cas, bravo à tout le monde.
Thank you very much, Thierry. And last but not least, Phil Packer. Phil's spent 17 years in the British Armed Forces, since when he's been focusing his energies on making a positive difference to young people facing adversity, with a particular focus on mental health, mental fitness and well-being. And Phil supports numerous charities as ambassador and patron. Phil, what would you like to add in to bring our morning to a close?
Thank you very much. May I say that the reason why I was asked to speak was through Professor Mike Lauder at the University of Chichester, because I founded and run a young adult mental health charity. I'm really struggling to know what to say because of my lived experience. I'm in my 40s, probably look like I'm in my 60s with a beard, but having gone through a process of acquiring a disability and having a career that came to a very abrupt halt, my own life has been affected with self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth issues. And what I've listened to and read about this morning is quite outstanding. And as someone who is trying to give a professional few words, I have to give it from a personal perspective. I really feel that it's quite important to say that I've seen over the last 12 years since having a disability and leaving the armed forces a large number of different initiatives, sometimes many of which are in a clinical setting, and I feel that sometimes the people that I have stayed in touch with over the years, or the people that I've met over the last over a lifetime of my own age, sometimes need something very different from a clinical setting. They need something that's safe. They need something that provides fellowship and friendship, and that will improve their self-esteem and their self-confidence and their self-worth. And all I can say to everyone listening is that I would absolutely champion this initiative. I can see so much potential in saving lives and improving lives. And that's something that I will certainly take away from today is how do I, or how could I try and influence local government supporting this in my county. And I very much hope that more people will support this, and it will be rolled out certainly within the UK on a national scale. So thank you for the opportunity to listen to everybody who's spoken this morning. It's hugely inspiring and very uplifting.
Thank you very much, Phil. And that's a wonderful note, I think, to conclude the main part of our morning today. I'd like firstly to thank all of our external speakers this morning. So that was Barry, Martin, Thierry, and Phil, and also the various partners that have spoken during the morning as well. And as a reminder, our partnership here in the Step by Step SBS project included Kent County Council, Hampshire County Council, the University of Chichester, and Wellbeing People in the UK, led by us at the Health in Europe Centre. And then in France, we've had Community, the Waterloo Association of Community Centres, and ADIS, Bulwark in Belgium, and De Mussen in the Netherlands. So I'd like to thank all of you for everything you've done over the last few years. We've had a wonderful project here. I hope for those of you who've been attending this morning, it'll have whetted your appetite to find out more. A recording of today's webinar, along with the presentations, and also all of the other documentation that's been referred to this morning, is either already or will within the next few days be on www.sbs-wellbeing.eu. The exception there are the final evaluation reports, which will be available next spring. They will include a small element around the impact of COVID, which is something that we've touched on and passed over, but haven't spent time on today. But of course, you know, we've been running this project through a particularly challenging period over the last year or so. So thank you very much. Do keep in touch with the project, with the partners that may be local to you where that's applicable. Look at the materials we've got here. I hope that many of us will cross paths again. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.